Hi everyone, I'm happy to be here at DASA Connect 2023. Uh, and today I'm going to talk to you about engineering culture and how you can leverage cloud, DevOps, and data in your business. Now, let me quickly introduce myself. My name is Bruno Mar Almeida. I'm head of technology and architecture at a company called Fortum. Fortum is one of the leading European energy companies, and a lot of what we do is digital development of tech, of course, technology solutions related with energy optimization, electric mobility, uh, recycling of materials, you name it. I'm really happy to be here sharing and having the opportunity to share my experience on a topic that is very dear to me, which is engineering culture. To start, I would like us to reflect on what are the cost dimensions today in technology. Now, if you think about it, over 25 years ago, compute was one of the most expensive technology resources that we had. You know, uh, uh, how how we could shift to technologies like virtualization or containers was one of the big influencing factors on making compute so affordable. Um, and 15 years ago, storage was the most expensive element. You know, this is one of the reasons why public cloud had a huge became hugely popular because one of the first services that they were offering was actually storage as a service. But today, we humans are the most expensive cost. So this is one of the things that I always encourage people to reflect because it's not about the tools, it's not about the computing power, it's not how much are you spending in cloud or how much data you are storing, is how you spend your time and the time of your teammates. This is one of the most important things to think about technology in your organization today. Engineers are expensive. So if you think from that perspective, what are some of the lessons that organizations end up learning the hard way? So I'm hoping to share with you these four things so that it can save you some time and your engineers' time on building a tech organization. One is that technology, things like DevOps, things like cloud, things like data, is not really something that is only for technology companies. It's not really something for Netflixes or Googles or Amazons. It is something that any kind of organization, enterprises, startups in any kind of industry need to start thinking it seriously because without technology, your business will not thrive, right? The other is that cloud, it is something that often when companies make the shift to cloud, they think that will immediately save them money because essentially they are trading capex to opex. They are shifting this big IT investments in data centers and in hardware with a pay-as-you-go model. But the reality, even though this is true, of course, the reality is that shifting to cloud and shifting to this model will not immediately save you money. You need to build your technology culture. You need to mature in as an organization to actually reap the benefits and to actually start potentially saving some money. The other is that DevOps culture is something that automatically breaks silos. So organizations tend to think that, you know, I have developers, I have my IT operations, I will just mix these people together, and all of a sudden I'll have a DevOps culture that will break this silos. And of course, in reality, it's not just about that. It's not just about mixing people, even though, of course, uh, mixing people by itself is good and people are exchanging their experiences. It is, of course, getting people to communicate is very important, but by itself, it's not enough to actually create a DevOps culture or to break those silos. Because often people uh, think as DevOps as the new way to do operations, and that's not really it, right? Even though you are empowering developers to have more autonomy, perhaps to also to have some competences in their infrastructure, it doesn't mean that things like robustness, architecture, reliability, security will go away. In the end, you will always need to think of your IT operations. Those things will not disappear, even though Of course, they will be a bit more simple, or they will be done in a bit of a different manner. But the need will always be there. So it is important to think from that way through. Now, one of the topics that time after time comes when the company is discussing about cloud or about data is security. Security is one of the most important aspects to any organization, but especially enterprises that have big liabilities when it comes to security and compliance, right? And one of the uh, pitfalls is that business leaders often think that when they switch to cloud, things like the responsibility for their security or the infrastructure security is on the cloud provider. They no longer need to do anything. And that is quite far from the truth. Of course, when you shift to cloud, all the cloud vendors, doesn't matter if it's Amazon or Microsoft or Google or any other, they have this shared responsibility model where at the baseline, when you think about physical infrastructure, when you think about hardware, they are responsible for the security of the cloud, of that infrastructure, but the responsibility to secure the resources inside the cloud. So things like your data or patching operating systems, encrypting your data. All of those things are and will always be your responsibility. Is how you use it. That is always your responsibility, right? Of course, it is easier when you are leveraging cloud to meet certain security and compliance standards. Things like GDPR and PCI DSS and ISO are great examples of things that become a lot easier to meet and to to be to meet those compliance levels. But this is not something that is granted. It's not just that because you are using cloud that all of a sudden you can say that I am ISO 27, GDPR, I'm compliant with all of this. That's not true. It does make it easier to become compliant, but is not granted. And one of the reasons why it makes it easier to become compliant is that things like implementing data encryption are a lot easier in the world of cloud compared in the old days in on premises. I still recall, like when I was working fully on premises, implementing things like data encryption in transit or at rest in the storage. It was not so trivial. It was not a push of a button. It was not a configuration setting. So it was something that often we end up not doing or becoming later in the backlog, right? In the world of clouds, uh, it is quite effortless and often free and without much performance impact to actually implement data encryption. And saying data, I'm giving data encryption as an example, but any other things that used to be really hard is a lot easier to do in cloud. So it is not about the how anymore, it's about the why. So why we actually do certain things, why we need to do certain things, because the how part with is quite simplified and a lot easier now with in the cloud world, right? So no matter which cloud provider you are using, there's a certain amount of similarity between them. So there's a few fundamental core building blocks across all the public cloud providers. So things like compute and network and storage and security and identity, there's often like almost one-to-one services, managed Kubernetes clusters in cloud provider A, you also have in cloud provider B and C, same with managed instances, managed databases, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm not saying that they are exactly one-to-one from the perspective of features. Of course, some service offering is more mature than the others, but at the fundamental level, they all provide those core building blocks that you can use to build solutions. Where I find the biggest difference is actually when it comes to data and AI capabilities. And here I would like to separate in three different parts, three different buckets, if you will. One is our data engineering bucket, where you have the data ingestion, storage, preparation, transformation, analytics, business intelligence. Those typical services, those typical capabilities, it is what companies start when they are looking into data, thinking about how can I leverage data in my organization. Is not about how I transform that, how I visualize that, how I do business intelligence, how I do analytics reporting, right? So this is of course a big important aspect, and this is one of the things that there's starts to be a lot of some differentiating factor across different providers. Then, when companies are a bit more mature and they are looking about into using AI and machine learning as an example, they are looking to that as a platform. How do they validate? How do they train models? How do they deploy models? How do they inference of models? And here also the capabilities start to different. But there's a third bucket, and in this third bucket is where I think that the biggest differentiation factor comes across the providers, which is AI and machine learning API. So the pre-trained APIs, the pre-trained models, right? So this started to become popular a few years back. So 3 to 5 years back, this started things like translation or sentiment analysis or image recognition, this type of AI capabilities that were accessible with using an API. The cloud providers started to build this as part of their offering, and the level of maturity is a bit different, a bit across them. But of course, now in the era of OpenAI and ChatGPT, this is where we start to see this kind of exploding in terms of differentiation factor and how actually there will be a bit of this cat and mouse a game of trying to catch up and in terms of feature parity and be across the providers. And this is where today is really easy for any organization, even the ones that don't really have data scientists or they don't understand about AI, to actually start leveraging some of these capabilities because they is simply an API call that is available in all the public cloud providers with different maturity levels, of course. So if you have all of these capabilities at your disposal, how can you actually start shaping or reshaping your organization to take advantage of it? And here, essentially, I think there's three levels that we need to consider. One, which is perhaps the one that your mind will immediately be drawn to, is the execution phase. If you want to start leveraging these tools, you start executing, you start doing experiments. Might be an AI experiment, might be that you are building an IoT platform, a web or mobile e-commerce solution. But this is where the engineer mindset goes very frequently and goes very fast to it, is about start doing, right? Because by start doing, you start experimenting and gaining gaining that knowledge. And that is, of course, true. But there's other part that I think is incredibly important, a different level, maybe to the left, or maybe if you think vertically to upper, which is on your company management, on the organization manager. So you might for your CEO, your CTO, your CIO, VPs, board members, you name it. And I think it is incredibly important that at that level of the organization, there's a good understanding of the fundamentals of what is data and AI today, how what is cloud and DevOps today, and how can they will help your organization to transform and become and take technology as part of your company strategy. So if we think about from that upper level and of strategic level, if you will, and execution level, there's something in between. And this something in between is governance or technology governance. And here the challenge is that technology governance has a bit of a negative connotation usually, especially in enterprises, but it is an incredibly important thing to be an enabler. So often if you think about data, data governance, data management, what data do we have in the organization? Where is it located? Who can access that data? It is an incredible important thing to know and to have in place. But others like platform engineering of thinking about the engineering experience of development best practices, what kind of tools we use in the organization, how do we actually take that flexibility that to enable teams to have a lot of end-to-end responsibility and autonomy to understanding on how we take the learnings from different projects. The other third angle on this governance is about innovation. So how you do the rapid experimentation of ideas, having a place to actually coordinate and to link between the execution and also with the business enablers is incredibly important. So you need to think about these three angles on, strategy, where do we want to go as an organization, to governance, how do we get there, and execution, and how fast are we going. And this is incredibly important to think from all of these dimensions when you think about shaping your organization. One of the things on this governance level that is quite popular and is something that I always encourage is to establish a software center of excellence. Now, some companies call this a cloud center of excellence or a DevOps center of excellence. It doesn't matter like what you call it. I prefer to call it a bit more holistic software center of excellence, just because it's not just about cloud or DevOps or data. It is about your software engineering. And in essence, it is important to think of this as an open and virtual steering group that can align across different disciplines on topics like technology strategy or risk and compliance, how we do cost management, what kind of guidelines we have. And it is incredibly important that you have this virtual group that is highly aligned, but also loosely coupled, that they have the freedom to drive their own competences, but there's a place where this synergies come into place. And this correlates really well also with platform engineering group. Actually, one could say that this center of excellence acts as a steering group or as a product owner, if you will, to platform engineering as a way to see those building blocks implemented in the organization. Now, one thing that is important when we think about cloud and DevOps and data is what is your operating model, right? Implementing that operating model. And often when companies think about technology, they follow the same operating model. Doesn't matter if it is an internal IT or if it's software development, they essentially treat it almost as the same when it comes to IT, right? And this is, of course, requires an evolution of your mindset, that you need to separate these two worlds a little bit, because there's, of course, a lot of similarities between these two, but there's also very important differences. So when you think about your internal IT or your core IT and your core IT applications, you are thinking applications that you are purchasing from a vendor and you are either using as a SaaS directly or you are self-hosting in hopefully a cloud provider. But essentially, you're talking about very standard type of workflows. You are thinking about your communication software, your ticket management software. So you're thinking about those type of things that is usually a managed instance with a managed database, very standard type of workloads that you want to run to, of course, to be productive. Then in the other end of that spectrum, you have digital development teams that can be they can be doing an AI experiment, they can be developing a new mobile application, they can be developing a new data platform. And the way that you treat these two worlds needs to have a differentiator, right? You cannot treat them in the same exact manner because that's a bit the challenge. So you need to have all the competences to come together to separate this into different operating models that can acknowledge those differences, but also share similar capabilities. And one of those things, why is this so important? Because if you are a digital development team and you are waiting 3 weeks or 4 weeks to get provision, to get access to a certain tool or to a certain cloud environment, it's half of the battle, right? It is quite draining, and so the experience is not right. So one of the things that we are doing at Fortum is innovation and rapid development. And we started something that we empower anyone in the organization to experiment with their digital ideas in 6 weeks, meaning that, given if anyone in the organization, doesn't matter what's the person's role, if they have an idea on how can they do something differently with technology that will improve the organization, improve their day-to-day, it might be potentially even a new business, right? We need to have a place for them to come together to co-create and co-develop this. So two things are fundamental in this. One is, of course, we need to have the building blocks. We have to have the operating model that enables this things to take place in a very fast manner. So you cannot be weeks or days waiting for a few things that should be taking minutes or hours. And the other is that you need to have a fantastic hybrid multi-competence team that brings different competences to the same table, like design, data, development, advisory, that can help the innovator to co-create, right? So you need to have these two to work seamless. Then maybe one third dimension is what happens after those 6 weeks. How do you actually engage the rest of the organization? How do you engage different technical competence leads, like your quality assurance technical lead, your DevOps tech lead, uh, your front end community, your back end community, different type of internal communities. How do you engage those into this to take the organizational learnings? But also, how do you get business enablers, so the people that can actually help to carry on and evaluate the business impact of the idea, the business feasibility of the idea after those 6 weeks. So you need to build this as a virtual extension body to that. If you have these ingredients, then you can actually start really building that uh, technology culture, that digital development culture that allows you to experiment and to create great outcomes. But one outcome that is often kind of missed when we are doing this is that it's not just about the amount of ideas that you can do in the 6 week cycles. It is a lot about the learning part. So every single idea that you do for 6 weeks is a learning opportunity. You learn something as a virtual team, right? You learn more about the business, you learn more about a certain technology, you gain the chance of experimenting with emergent technologies. And that is incredibly important. So often when we think about learning, we are thinking about trainings, right? And trainings are, of course, important. I mean, DASA has a few interesting trainings that I will encourage you all to explore. Trainings, instructor-led trainings or self-learning platforms are incredibly important from an individual perspective to do that. But you also need to think about as a group, as an organization. And organizational learning it's about the collectiveness, right? It is about us coming together. So some is about this 20% that I have here, is about mentoring, coaching, about networking. So something that we do on this domain is we organize lean coffee sessions every week where people can come together to discuss technology, different, internal things or external things, something interesting that happened in the outside world, but something that helps people to discuss and to actually spar. Other is fostering different technology communities. So internally, your internal front end community or your quality assurance community. So different communities are important to people to network, people that share the same role. It is important that they come together, right? So if you think from all of these dimensions, the biggest bulk is actually, which is 70%, is what you learn throughout the job. So when of course, this varies from individual to individual. What is their role and what do they do in most of their time, right? But one thing that we always encourage, and I always encourage, is that add always a small component of experimentation to what you are doing. So try to learn something new, try to explore a different way of doing as much as you can. So because that will allow you to grow, right? Now, last but not least, I think when you think about culture, you need to think about the experience. And often we are drawn to think about customer experience, right? Without customers, you don't have a company. And that's, of course, very true. And you need to think about customer experience. But also without employees, you don't have a company. So the employee experience is also very crucial. Your employees need to have a great experience to provide a good customer experience, right? But something that is a bit in the middle when it comes to technology organizations is engineering experience. So the developer experience. So this, without a great developer experience, it's really challenging to actually build new digital solutions. So that's something that I will encourage you always to think a bit. How do you bridge this gap between these two worlds, right? I hope that this was beneficial to you. I hope that you enjoyed it. Happy to answer any questions. And of course, feel free to reach out via LinkedIn or Twitter at any point in time. A big thank you.